This video is going to focus on describing economic growth, not just with the United States, but with any country. And we're going to use two models to describe and measure economic activity. The first is what we're going to call the production function model, and the second is the gross domestic product model. So the production function model. So Q is our output. That's how much is being produced. And Q is a function of inputs. So in order to produce something, you need land and resources, you need labor or workers, and you need capital, machines. And you need some combination of those three, and they come together, and then you can produce something. F is this what we call a measure of technology. So it's our ability to take land, labor, and capital and convert it to output. And so this is our basic model. When we talk about economic growth, we're talking about increasing output, increasing the quantity. And so there are two ways to increase the output. Can you identify those two ways? Well, those two ways can be called extensive growth, meaning that we increase the inputs. We get more land, we get more labor, we get more capital. The other way is intensive growth. You get changes in technology. That's the F. All right, it's an actual function that converts those inputs into output. So we talk about historically, how has the U.S. increased output? Well, we can look at this at the colonization period, where one of the big ways that they increased output was to increase the amount of land. So as we see westward expansion, that's increasing the land, which is going to increase the economic output of the nation. We also see that it increased the people as we see immigration come through from the founding of this country, through the headright system, through indentured servitude, and even slavery. That increased economic output. And so these are different ways. But we've also seen recently the change in technology. That technology allows us to be able to use machines now and know how to use machines to take the same number of input and to increase it. A recent number I saw is that the output of the manufacturing industry has increased by over 600%, but the number of workers in that industry has decreased by millions. And one reason is because of technology. We can use technology now to use fewer workers to increase our productivity. The other model is what we call the gross domestic product model. So the definition of the gross domestic product, it's the value of goods and services produced in a country in a specific period of time. Typically, we're going to look at a single year. So how is it calculated? We look at the different ways in which goods can be produced. So goods can be produced for consumption, meaning that they're consumed today. They can be produced in investment. They're used to make other goods. We can look at government spending and net exports. So what does it measure? It measures the final value of these goods and services. So if you buy a good and then use that to build another good, so let's suppose I buy steel and I use that steel to build a factory, that's going to go into investment because it's not, that steel is not the final good. But if I use that steel and make a car, then that car is the final good or service. And it's measuring the income of a country by measuring the expenses. So how do you increase GDP? Well, you increase it through increasing consumption, increasing investment, increasing the government spending, or increasing net exports. And so those are the ways, and we're going to talk a lot about this model and how it relates to what we call Keynesian economics as a way for a country to weather storms through weather its way through economic storms. So how has it changed over time? Well, this is one of the graphs that's going to show how GDP has changed dramatically. As we look since the year 1 AD, GDP per capita has been close to zero. That there's not been a lot of economic growth, and it stayed flat for hundreds of years, even thousands of years. 1,500 years it stayed flat. And then in the 16, 1700s and the 1800s, we start to see it increase dramatically. Such that in the 1900s and 2000s, we see it increase a whole lot. And so this is actually GDP of the world and not necessarily GDP per capita. So we see a very large increase in the GDP. If we look at now this next graph, GDP per capita, even in the United States since 1950, the amount produced per person is increasing dramatically. That now it's up to almost $60,000. When we look at changes in GDP, right, during recessions are times when the GDP decreases. And so we see the positive lines here is when the GDP has increased from one year to the other. But in late 2008, early 2009, the Great Recession, we see the GDP, the size of the economy, decrease. When we look at countries across the world, the GDP is dramatically different, right? We see Western Europe, the United States, and North America, and Australia. With GDP per capita over 30 and 40,000. When you look at South America, it's between 10 and 20,000. When you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, it's less than 2,500, in some places even less than $1,000 per person per year. And so why are some countries rich and some countries poor? This is going to be one of those questions that really leads economists to start to think. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, is going to start asking these questions, and it's going to lead to the foundation of economics to try to understand why is it that some countries are rich and some countries are poor.